Welcome back to the Seeing Red podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Fulce. Thank you so much for joining us this week. If you didn't watch last week's episode, it's because it was released last Monday. I was sick and was having technical issues. I'm still having some of those same tech issues because of how I record this. It's been a little hit or miss. So there might be some weird hiccups in the recording or the audio, so I do apologize for that. But a lot happened this week, so let's just get into it. We're kind of going to start breaking this down into a few different sections. We're going to have statewide and federal if necessary. Then we'll also just talk about what the House is doing, what the Senate's doing, and kind of move from there. I think the biggest news was obviously kind of the reaction to the governor's state of the state, which was last Sunday. A lot of people kind of getting the ammo ready and drawing the dividing lines, so to speak, on any given issue. The first salvo really was the Senate took up SB 2, which was their school choice bill. There's a lot being talked about in that bill. That is the main bill right now, since the House hasn't started theirs yet. But SB 2 passed by a vote of 19 to 12. There's 31 senators, so 19 to 12. It wasn't a party line vote. Well, no Democrat voted for it, and one Republican, Senator Nichols from East Texas, didn't vote for it either. So it was 19 to 12, and that now goes to the House, where it can be considered at the House's discretion. Everyone's keeping an eye on it. That's the big piece. But the other thing to keep an eye on are the budgets. As for any of the programs that are going to come out, and the thought, I think I saw Scott Braddock mention this. Kind of the thought in Austin right now is that the House is going to go through the budgeting process first to see how much they're trying to do in tax cuts, how much they're trying to do for water infrastructure, power infrastructure, teacher raises, and see what they have left to do for an ESA program. That's for the House bill. $1 billion is a big number. There's no denying that. When you look at the totality of the Texas budget, it's about a percentage. It's about a percentage, which is a lot. It's a substantial amount of money for the families involved and everything else. But it is something where just making it $1 billion and going from there doesn't make a whole bunch of sense if there's more or less in projected revenue over the next few years. So I suspect the House will probably have more in it initially. My suspicion is that will be the way. They're like, oh, we're doing so much more than the Senate, because if it's not been said on this program, it will be said many, many times. There is a intense rivalry between the House and the Senate. Almost as much so as there are between Republicans and Democrats, or between rural and urban and suburban members. The differentiation in chamber is substantial, and it's something to keep an eye on. So the Senate passed it, and then basically went straight into. They also started a resolution to take a 5-day weekend. It sounds weird because you only have 140 days. You can take up the emergency items, but there's only so much that by statute and by the Constitution, you can only do so much at any given time. Some of it's literally designed for the process to go slow at first. And part of that is because they want people, the Constitution, the framers, the founders wanted the legislators to consider the legislation, not just one piece at a time, but as a whole. So if you look at the history of Texas and the legislature, this kind of slow start, so to speak, is not a bug of the system. It's not somebody trying to gum the works or slow things down. It's how the system is designed. The system is designed to be slow. because the framers didn't trust government. And whenever the government's getting in there to tweak or add or do anything new, they knew it was probably going to get busted up and broken somehow. And if you rush that thing, it's only worse. So that seems to be being lost in the media fight right now. You have these folks like Brian Harrison who are just tweeting about this nonstop because he just wants another news hit. And really, it's just the matter of form. But it's funny because they never mentioned the Senate. The Senate started this resolution. What's funny is the chambers have to be in agreement that they're going to take a break to a certain degree. And like the Senate did it first and then the House agreed. So that's interesting. And only if you think it's interesting that these folks are disingenuous Neanderthals who are just really, really, really trying to get folks out there in the world to see things wrong, just to be just to make people mad about something that's if there's a phenomenon, I forget what it's called, but where if you explain something in a complicated way that's really simple, you see a lot on resumes where people over explain the work they've done in the past. So to say something really simple like I worked with Fortune 500 companies to transfer the intended message and product from the manufacturer to the end user. And that's used to describe like a delivery driver or something. Like that's the kind of thing that happens a lot in politics, is if you use some scary words and you'll use a lot more things to explain something mundane, you end up scaring people because they just hear the scary words and they're primed to just be livid about stuff. So that's where this starts with the Senate. Now we move to the House. We've already started talking about it. The House is still in the process of organizing. Now, the House didn't have a presiding officer until after session started. The Senate's presiding officer is a statewide elected official. We already know who the lieutenant governor is. The lieutenant governor has time to plan and think and mull and determine how he wants the committee structure, and not just the chairman's, but the structure of the given committees. We talked about it before. Just a few minutes ago, we talked about how there's rural implications versus urban, suburban versus rural, especially when it comes to things like water and education and transportation. Like, where do you put transportation funding? Where do you put the water infrastructure? Where do you put the water tank? And whose district is the pipeline going to go through to get to where it needs to go? These sorts of questions, when we're looking at big statewide stuff, like they have a lot of intricacies to it, and the lieutenant governor has had time to consider it. Now, Speaker Burrows didn't start running until December, and it was an open question whether or not he was going to win up until he took the gavel. So he didn't have nearly as much time. Now, some of the people on his leadership team have, so there's a blueprint to work from, but he's still going to have to put his own touches on the final result. So it's going to take a little bit longer just with how the speaker came in. And once again, Brian Harrison just wants to stay in Austin to talk about stuff, which he doesn't want to go back to his district, which I drove through the other day and all the service roads were flooded. You drive through pretty much any time you get south of Dallas, you hit the Dallas County line, you're in Brian Harrison's district. And if you look over to the right and to the left, mostly to the right going southbound, you just see the service roads flooded out for miles and miles. And it's not just his district. A rain had just happened. So I'm not saying, oh, whatever. Like, it's probably going to drain off. But every time I've gone up to visit my folks up in the Dallas area, you look to the right, it's always flooded in his district. Maybe he should focus on the water and transportation issues in his district and go listen to those people about what those problems are so he can address those issues in the legislature and not just on Newsmax where he's talking to whomever else. It is very, very clear as you're starting to look at the people out there doing things that are a little bit weird or a little bit out of kilter with everyone else, that these folks are looking at the next election and they're not looking to run for re-election. Brian Harrison's going to run for something. My bet is he's going to run against Jake Ellzey for Congress. They had run against each other before, but no one knew who Harrison was at that point. And then because Ellzey won, he was the representative for that county, and now Harrison won the special election to fill in his seat. I think it's clear as mud, clear as day, that Harrison is going to run for something else next time. Maybe a Senate spot pops open because of everything else. A lot of stuff when you're at the House level, you're looking to see how other people are going to move and filter. But if nothing like makes a lot of sense for Harrison to move to, he's almost certainly going to run for a congressional seat. You look at folks like Nate Chatline and Steve Toth, the other remedial caucus that had been in the thing before. Toth, depending on who runs for what at the Senate from the Texas Senate level, there are spots to run there. There's people in Congress to run against. Maybe I'm not exactly sure what district he's in, but there are some folks that are rumored to be retiring near where Toth's district is. So he could be in the same boat. We really need to start having a conversation about, these people aren't in there to legislate for their current district. They're in there to campaign for a primary, for a congressional seat, or for a statewide seat. Just to kind of go back to the Senate, because this all filters back down, or we can just go to the statewide, because the House we're still waiting on committee assignments, and this kind of whole conversation goes back to this. There were some news reports out this past week where Lieutenant Governor Patrick had gone to D.C. And then come back, and he's done some interviews. And a lot of the folks I'm hearing and talking to are saying that he's not looking like himself. There have been rumors speculating about Lieutenant Governor Patrick's health for a long time. I'm not here to speculate on the veracity of any given diagnosis of somebody. He is getting up there in age. He's in his 70s. And I believe he's in his 70s. I have to look that up. But, he's getting up there. And he's saying he's going to run again. And he might run again. But if he were to run again, it'd because he kind of had to, in my view. If he runs again, it would basically be to choose his successor with more certainty. The way a lieutenant governor vacancy happens if somebody were to resign or retire while in office is it's selected by the body of the Senate from the body of the Senate. So if the lieutenant governor wants to select somebody that's a current senator to fill that role, he would have, and after being retired, if he were to retire or resign, then it would have to be, the Senate would have to choose it from themselves. And the odds-on favorite would be whomever Patrick, anointed, so to speak. The conjecture, and if you'd watch the State of the State and the aftermath and the kind of how the school choice stuff is going, is the conjecture. This is all rumor. Is that it's the heir apparent is Senator Creighton. He's leading the effort on school choice. He's doing more to get his name out there than he had in the past. If you're an insider or you follow Texas politics, you know who the senators are for the most part, or you at least know their names, and if not their faces. But he's doing more and more to get out there to be on the stage. Like he did a part of the after action conversation on the State of the State. He's taking the lead on SB2, so his name's getting out there all the time. It seems clear that that's the intent, is to tee him up to run for lieutenant governor or to take it on within the Senate and it be a logical choice. Dan Patrick is one of the best politicians in Austin when it comes to just pure political savvy. I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I worked for his opponent in 2014, the former Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst. It was my job to go to events and record them for the campaign of the opponents. So I saw Dan Patrick speak all over the place, and it was impressive. He was very good, I'm sure if you've seen him. He's very good at engaging with the crowd. He's very good at listening to people at one event and how they're reacting to his speeches, and then modifying it to really hammer it in, like a kind of like a comedian would as they're working on their stump speech. Some politicians just memorize it and just kind of get it out there. Patrick's really good at figuring out where the laugh lines are, where the holds are, like all the small stuff of, gonna pause here or whatever else, and working the crowd, because he's been in entertainment for his entire career up until then. He's a radio jockey, a TV sports guy. I think he was a shock jock for a short amount of time. Like, these are the kinds of things that, I mean, that's his where he comes from. He has a particular skill for it, and he has a good way of messaging. He knows how to speak to evangelical, conservative Christian folks in a way that is able to touch on commonly held beliefs between the folks and get folks to support him. So if Dan Patrick were to run again, I'd have zero doubt, unless he were to have a serious Biden issue. And even so, unless he were to have that sort of problem, I don't see him losing if he just chooses to run again. But it is something to consider that he may be trying to set up a situation for an heir apparent or someone else to run or whatever else. Now, he's insisting that he's going to run again. But if you're a statewide office holder going into the last session, until you think there's no more special sessions that are going to be called, you are going to insist that you're going to keep running, because you don't want to be a lame duck, because you don't want people to not be afraid of you, because half of the lieutenant governor's power comes from their fear of what he could do to them in the future. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're just listening for the rumor mill, that's what people are talking about in conversations that I've had. There are any number of different scenarios. Figuring out what the big three intend to do is going to be what figures out everything else below it. Because the same person who would run for an open seat isn't necessarily going to go into a contested primary against a popular incumbent. That's just obvious, right? Or even an unpopular incumbent, depending on what the case may be. So if we're looking at the big three, it's going to be governor, lieutenant governor, senator. So Abbott, Patrick, and Cornyn. What they decide to do for 2026 is going to impact what other people run for: House to Senate to, people can run for anything. But what's interesting is that since no one knows what those three are going to be doing, they're all going to be acting, if they have ambition to move on to the next level, are going to start doing things to basically peacock themselves, spread out their plumage and show off their tail feathers, so to speak, to try and get attention, to get donor buzz, to get people talking about them, to try and work that system earlier, without necessarily going for a specific goal. So somebody, let's use a Harrison example, since I'm pretty convinced he wants to run for, at the very least, Congress. But it's possible, if you see all three of the big three decide not to run, you have total chaos at the bottom, and Harrison might see a great opposition for, I'm not sure where he's at with the Senate, but for Senate, or maybe he'll see a better opportunity. The thing to think about is all that stuff starts moving. But if you already have a plan to move to somewhere, you just don't know where. you can start still peacocking yourself, showing off the tail feathers, and then, exposing yourself on Twitter on a daily basis if you think it's going to help you in your run for future office because you need those donor dollars or you need that exposure for name ID. So that gets some weird outcomes when it comes to normal legislation amendments and a procedure when it comes to the Texas House, Texas Senate, which is one of the reasons why we're less likely to see major movement on social issues in this term. You might see some bills that percolate and die or whatever, but part of it will be that somebody doesn't want their rival to get credit. So if you have two people in the same area, they might be running for Congress or they might be going for the same Senate seat. You may see a situation where let me use people who were, two senators or two representatives from Harris County who are in the same whatever seat. They may not want to see the other one get a big move, so they'll work behind the scenes to kill it. It's just a lot of things are more likely to die in this session, unless it's stuff that kind of has to pass, or unless there's enough public spotlight on an issue where you can't kill it behind the scenes. So it's going to be an interesting session. Those are the kind of the big three I wanted to talk about. Like I said at the beginning, I'm going to start structuring the show a little bit more and writing out a little bit more so I have an idea of making sure I hit the Senate, I hit this House, I hit the statewides, and they're moving and shaking. And then I'll probably have various sundry that will pick up things like higher ed or like interesting local level stuff. So like if the mayor of Houston's doing something or the county judge of Tarrant County or something that should be addressed, I'll talk about that there. But besides that, I appreciate it. Appreciate all the folks who emailed me. I got back to most folks. I know one person asked me to call them back. I haven't gone around to doing that yet. But give me a call and tell me what you want to listen to, what you want me to research. The how I'm structuring the show was the product of somebody reaching out and talking to me a little bit about what they wanted to see. So if you want to see a different anything, let me know. And I'm happy to jump on it. But until then, I appreciate you watching the show. The real thing like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter at GWFulce. Like it and subscribe to it on YouTube or on the podcast platform you're listening on. But just make sure that wherever we're at, you're following us for news and updates. And I look forward to talking to y'all next week. Thanks, guys.